You're standing in a cold, dark cellar. There's a stone crock at your feet. You lift the lid. Inside, floating in cloudy water, sit 3 dozen eggs. They've been down there since spring, and every single one is still good. That's where my story ends. Let me take you back to where it started. Here is what I found, and it stopped me cold. Canadians once kept eggs fresh for a full year without a fridge, without power, without spending a single cent on electricity. The method was ordinary once. Now almost nobody alive remembers it. And the reason you've never heard of it is tangled up with the very thing people are starting to notice at grocery stores right now. The trail I followed ends at a farm bulletin printed in 1915 and a stone crock in a farmhouse outside Peterborough, Ontario. I stood in that cellar this past February, watching an 87-year-old woman lift eggs out of water that had been sitting since the previous May. And this works in the kitchen you already have. No renovation, no special room, just a pot and a shelf. So let me walk you through it, the same way I stumbled through it, one strange clue at a time. It started with something small, something you've probably noticed yourself and shrugged off. I buy a carton of eggs. I bring it home. I put it in the fridge, because that's what the carton tells me to do. And within 3 or 4 weeks, some of them have gone off. That's just how eggs are, I figured. That's just the deal. But then I got to talking with an old fellow named Roy, out past Lindsay, who kept hens most of his life. And Roy said something that stuck in my head like a splinter. He said his mother kept eggs on the pantry shelf, not the icebox, and they'd sit there a month easy, no refrigeration at all, in the summer heat. Now that made no sense to me. Everything I'd ever been told says an egg left on the counter is a ticket to a stomach you'll never forget. So I pushed him. I said, "Roy, that can't be right. You'd get sick." And he just looked at me the way old-timers look at you when you've swallowed something whole without chewing. He said, "The eggs you buy aren't the same eggs. They did something to yours." They did something to yours. That line wouldn't let me sleep. So I started digging. And the first thing I learned turned everything I thought I knew about a simple egg upside down. Here's the piece nobody tells you. When a hen lays an egg, that egg comes out wearing an invisible coat. Farmers call it the bloom. Scientists call it the cuticle. It's a thin, natural layer the hen's body lays down over the shell in the last few minutes before the egg is laid. And that coat is doing a very important job. An eggshell is not solid. It's covered in thousands of microscopic pores, somewhere between 7,000 and 17,000 tiny holes, and through those holes air moves, moisture escapes, and bacteria can crawl inside. The bloom seals every one of them. It's nature's own shrink wrap. As long as that coat stays on, the inside of the egg stays clean and protected, sitting on a shelf for weeks and weeks. That's why Roy's mother could keep eggs in the pantry. Her eggs still had their coat on. So here's the question that started to burn in me. If a fresh egg comes sealed and protected straight from the hen, why does the egg I buy at the store rot in a month, even in a cold fridge? What happened to the coat? And the answer is the first real clue on this trail. In Canada, every egg you buy at a grocery store has been washed. It's not optional. Under the federal grading system, eggs sold through the regular commercial channel are cleaned and sanitized before they ever reach that carton. They run through machines with warm water and detergent. They get scrubbed, and they come out looking bright and spotless and perfect. And that washing strips the bloom clean off. The moment that natural coat is gone, all those thousands of little pores are wide open. Now the egg has no protection at all. Now it truly does need to live in a cold fridge, because cold is the only thing slowing down the bacteria that can now walk right in. The egg didn't become fragile by accident. It was made fragile. Now I want to be fair here, because I was skeptical the whole way. And you should be too. Washing eggs isn't some evil plot dreamed up in a boardroom. It started for a real reason, keeping visibly dirty eggs clean and cutting down on certain risks. That part is honest. But here's where it gets interesting, and here's where I started to feel that itch that tells me there's more under the surface. Because in a lot of the world, they don't do it our way at all. Go to a shop in much of Europe, and you'll find eggs sitting right out on a regular shelf, room temperature, no refrigeration in sight. Over there, the rules actually forbid washing table eggs in many cases, precisely so the bloom stays on and the egg keeps protecting itself. Same bird, same egg, completely opposite approach. They keep the coat, we scrub it off, and then plug the egg into an electric fridge to make up for what we took away. Once I saw that, I couldn't unsee it. We took the free, natural protection off the egg, and then we sold everybody a system where the egg only survives if it stays cold, in a machine, running on power you pay for, in a supply chain you don't control. They're noticing the eggs don't keep like they used to at grandma's. They're noticing the prices, they're noticing how much they throw out, and somewhere in the back of their minds a quiet voice is saying the same thing Roy said to me. They did something to yours. So now I had a real mystery. If the store egg is a stripped-down dependent version of the thing, then how on earth did our grandparents keep eggs for months, even a full year, back before anybody had a working fridge on the farm? Because they did. Every record I found said they did. That question is what led me to the crock in the cellar. But before I get to what was in it, I have to tell you about the winter that made this whole thing matter. Think about the way a farm worked 100 years ago, here in Canada. Hens are creatures of light. In the long days of spring and summer, they lay like crazy. A good flock would flood the kitchen with more eggs than any family could eat. But when the days get short and the cold clamps down, hens nearly stop. Through the deep of a Canadian winter, egg production would fall off a cliff, so the family faced a hard math problem every single year. Baskets and baskets of eggs in June that would only spoil. And then months of dark, frozen winter with barely an egg to be found, right when a body needs the most nourishment to stay warm and well. There were no year-round grocery flights of eggs from somewhere warm. There was no fridge humming in the corner. If you wanted eggs in January, you had to reach across time and save the summer's surplus. And a family's health through the hardest months could hang on whether they got this right. So they got very good at it. This wasn't a hobby. This was survival knowledge, passed hand to hand, mother to daughter, written into the farm bulletins, the government itself printed, and mailed out to households. And this is the exact knowledge that has almost completely vanished. Not because it stopped working, because the fridge showed up, and the grocery store showed up, and within a couple of generations nobody needed to remember. Convenience didn't argue with the old way. It just quietly made everybody forget it existed. And once you forget how to keep your own eggs, you have to buy them fresh, over and over, forever. That's the thing about a skill that dies. Somebody always ends up better off when you can no longer do for yourself what your grandmother did for free. Now let me take you back to that farmhouse outside Peterborough, because this is where the trail turned from theory into something I could hold in my hands. I'd been asking around for months. Anytime I met somebody older who'd grown up rural, I'd ask the same thing. How did your family keep eggs through the winter? Mostly, I got shrugs. But a neighbor finally said, "You need to talk to Edith." Edith was 87, sharp as a tack. She'd lived on the same property her whole life, in a house her grandfather built. And when I asked my question, she didn't answer. She just said, "Come down to the cellar, I'll show you." The cellar was cold and dry and smelled of earth and old wood, and there in the corner sat a big glazed crock, the kind people use for planters now. She lifted the wooden lid. Inside was a cloudy, slightly milky liquid, and under the surface, packed careful and neat, were dozens of eggs. She reached in barehanded, pulled one out, rinsed it in a bucket, cracked it into a bowl. The yolk stood up round and proud. It smelled like nothing but egg. She told me those eggs had gone into that crock the previous May. I was looking at them in the dead of February. 9 months. No power, no fridge. Just a crock in a cool corner and whatever was in that cloudy water. And I stood there feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. I felt like I'd been robbed of something and never even knew it was mine. So of course I asked her, "What's in the water?" Now hold that question, because I promise I'm going to give you the full answer, the exact method, before we're done. But first, I need you to understand why this got buried, because that's the part that turned my curiosity into something closer to anger. The more I dug into old Canadian and North American farm records, the more I realized how completely ordinary this knowledge used to be. This wasn't a secret. It was in the household bulletins mailed to farm wives. It was in the general store catalogs, where you could buy the very ingredient by the tin. During the two world wars, when eggs were precious and had to be stretched, governments actively encouraged families to preserve their own eggs this way at home. It was patriotic. It was normal. It was everywhere. And then, in the span of about one generation, it was gone. Here's what happened. Household refrigeration spread across the country through the middle of the last century. At the same time, the egg business got organized, centralized, and industrialized. Small flocks in the backyard gave way to big commercial operations. Eggs became something you bought, graded and washed and cartoned, not something you produced and kept. And notice what that shift did. The moment you stop keeping your own eggs, you become a permanent customer. You're back at that cooler every single week. And because the egg has been washed and stripped of its coat, you can't hold it long even if you try. The system isn't just selling you eggs, it's selling you the need to keep coming back. I'm not saying anybody sat in a room and plotted to make you forget. I don't need a cartoon villain, and neither do you. But I will say this plainly. When a family can preserve a year's worth of eggs in a crock in the corner, that family is very hard to sell to. And when that same family forgets how, and starts throwing out store eggs that spoiled in 3 weeks, and buys again and again and again, somebody counts that as a very good outcome. The forgetting was profitable. That's just a fact. And that is exactly the thing people are starting to notice in the grocery aisle. If this kind of buried knowledge pulls at you the way it pulls at me, I want to point you towards something I put together called Canadian Edge, and there are 2 deeper versions called Deep Canadian and Canadian Complete for those who want to go further. It's a digital book built around exactly this kind of research, the old skills, the forgotten methods, the things that used to keep Canadian families fed and steady through hard seasons, all of it gathered in one place you can read tonight. Everything I've been tracing through old bulletins and cold cellars ended up on those pages. You'll find the link in the description below. But let me bring you back to the trail, because the answer to that mystery is closer than you think. And the cost of the forgetting lands on you. Think of the money that walks out to the curb in this country in spoiled eggs and wasted groceries. Think of what a carton runs now compared to a few years back. Think of standing at the store in a storm because you can't keep a 2-week buffer of your own. Every bit of that traces back to a skill that used to live in ordinary kitchens and quietly got erased. But here's the good news, and this is the part I could not wait to tell you. The knowledge didn't die all the way. It survived in cellars like Edith's. It survived in those old printed bulletins that never got thrown out. It survived with the handful of homesteaders and old-timers who just kept doing it because it always worked. The trail went cold for most people. It didn't go cold everywhere, and I followed it all the way to the end. Now, before I give you the full method, I want to talk straight to somebody specific, because I know a lot of you are listening to me talk about crocks and cellars and thinking, that's fine for a farm, but I live in a townhouse, or an apartment, or a 50-year-old house with no root cellar and no cool corner. This isn't for me. I want you to hear me clearly. This next part is for you especially. You do not need a farm. You do not need a cellar. You do not need to own your home, hire anyone, or knock down a single wall. Everything I'm about to describe fits in the kitchen you already stand in. Let me start with the simplest thing you can do this very week, the free one, the one that costs you nothing but a minute of attention. You know the fridge tells you eggs live in the door. That's actually the worst spot. The door swings open and shut all day, and the temperature swings with it. Move your eggs deep into the body of the fridge, toward the back, where it stays coldest and steadiest, and keep them in their carton, not out in that fancy plastic egg tray. The carton shields them from soaking up fridge smells and from losing moisture. That one small change alone can stretch your store eggs meaningfully further. It costs nothing. Most people have been doing it wrong their whole lives because a fridge company molded egg-shaped cups into a door. Next, learn the test that ends the guessing forever. This is old kitchen wisdom, and it's dead simple. Fill a bowl or a glass with cool water and gently lower the egg in. A truly fresh egg is dense and sinks flat on its side at the bottom. As an egg ages, air seeps in through those pores, and the air pocket inside grows, so an older egg will start to stand up on one end. If it floats to the top, the air pocket has gotten large, and that one goes in the compost, not the pan. No more cracking a bad egg into your breakfast. No more tossing good eggs out of fear because a printed date says so. The egg itself tells you the truth, if you know how to ask. And here's a thing that surprised me. That printed best before date is not a safety cliff, it's a grading and freshness marker. A properly kept egg is very often perfectly good well past it. Millions of good eggs get thrown in the garbage across this country every year purely because people trust the stamp more than the egg. Learn the float test, and you take that decision back into your own hands, right there at your own sink. Now, if you can get your hands on eggs that were never washed, from a farm stand, a neighbor with hens, a farmer's market, then you can do what Roy's mother did. Unwashed eggs, coat intact, keep beautifully on a cool counter or pantry shelf for weeks and far longer in a cool spot. No fridge required. Just don't wash them until the moment you're ready to use them. The second you wash off that bloom, the clock starts. So you wash and you cook. Simple. But all of that, the fridge trick, the float test, the unwashed eggs on the shelf, all of it is just holding eggs for weeks. Edith held hers for 9 months, in a crock, in a townhouse-sized corner, and that's the secret I promised you at the very start. So let me finally open the lid. Here is the method that used to live in every farm kitchen and now lives almost nowhere. It's called water glassing. And when I finally traced it back to those old bulletins from around 1915 and through the war years, and then watched it work with my own eyes, I understood exactly why our great-grandparents swore by it. The idea is beautifully simple. If washing an egg strips its natural coat and leaves the pores open, then to store an egg for the long haul, you give it a new coat. You seal those thousands of pores back up, and you keep bacteria and air out by keeping the egg completely submerged in a special solution. The liquid becomes the new bloom, no air gets in, nothing spoils, and the egg waits, patiently, for months. There are 2 classic ways to make that solution, and both were common here. The old original way used a product called sodium silicate, which folks called water glass. That's where the whole method got its name. It's a thick, syrupy substance that you could once buy right off the general store shelf, and you still can find it today. The traditional recipe was about 1 part water glass to 9 or 10 parts water that had been boiled and then cooled. You mix it into a clean crock or a food-safe pail. You gently lower in your fresh, unwashed eggs so they're fully covered with an inch or 2 of liquid over the top. You put a lid on, and you set it somewhere cool. That's it. Those eggs will keep, good for cooking and baking, for many months, commonly right through 8 or 9 months and often longer. That was the exact method the government bulletins described to families 100 years ago. The second way, the one a lot of homesteaders swear by today because the ingredient is so easy to get, uses pickling lime. That's calcium hydroxide, the same food-grade lime people use for making pickles crisp, and you'll find it near the canning supplies. The rule of thumb here is about 1 ounce of pickling lime, roughly a tablespoon, stirred into each quart of cool water, or scaled up, about a cup of lime to a gallon. Stir it in, and it won't all dissolve. That's fine. Some settles as a milky cloud at the bottom, which is exactly what I saw in Edith's crock. Then you lower in your fresh, unwashed, uncracked eggs, keep them covered by an inch or 2 of the lime water, lid it, and tuck it in a cool spot. Eggs kept this way have a long, long shelf life, commonly a year and even beyond. Now let me give you the handful of rules that make or break this, because I want you to actually succeed, not just nod along. The eggs must be fresh, and they must be clean but unwashed. This is the whole ball game. The eggs need to still have their natural bloom, so this works with farm eggs, or your own hen's eggs, not with the washed eggs from the grocery cooler. If an egg has a bit of dirt on it, you gently brush it off dry. You do not wash it. Never put a washed egg or a cracked egg in the crock. One bad apple, as they say. Use a food-safe container, glass, glazed crock, or food-grade pail. Never anything metal that the solution could react with. Store it somewhere cool and out of the sun. A basement corner, a cold room, an unheated closet, a pantry against an outside wall. It does not need to be a proper root cellar. Cool and steady is all it wants. And when you want eggs, you reach in, take what you need, rinse them well in clean water, and cook them. One gentle note the old-timers always passed along. When you're boiling a preserved egg, prick a tiny hole in the wide end with a pin first, because the sealed shell can crack in the pot otherwise. Little trick, saved from a bulletin, still true today. Think about what this actually gives you. In late spring and summer, when eggs are cheapest and most plentiful, whether from your own hens, a neighbor, or a farm stand, you fill a crock. It costs you almost nothing. A few dollars of lime, a container you already have, and you walk yourself straight through the winter, and the storms, and the price spikes, and the empty shelf days, with a year's worth of good eggs sitting quietly in the corner. That's not a prepper fantasy. That's just what a normal Canadian farm family did every single year, until we all forgot. I tried it myself after I left Edith's. I got 1.5 dozen unwashed eggs from a farm outside town, mixed up the lime water exactly the way the old recipe called for, and set the crock in the coolest corner of my basement. I'll be honest, part of me expected to open it in a few months to a rotten mess. I was wrong. Months on, I cracked one into the pan and it cooked up just like a fresh egg. The proof was right there in the skillet. The old bulletin was right. Edith was right. Roy's mother was right. And every carton I'd ever thrown out had been telling me a lie about what an egg actually is. That's the moment this stopped being a curiosity for me and started feeling like something that had been taken. A whole, free, simple, reliable way to feed your family through the hard months, sitting in plain sight in printed government pages from 1915, and almost nobody I knew had ever heard a word of it. So here's where we've landed, you and me. What people are noticing at the grocery store, the eggs that won't keep, the prices that keep climbing, the feeling that something's off, isn't in their heads. The store egg really is a stripped-down thing, scrubbed of the very coat that used to let it last, sold to you in a way that keeps you coming back. And the answer isn't some new gadget. The answer is a stone crock, a spoonful of lime, and a piece of knowledge your great-grandmother would have called common sense. That's the whole thing, isn't it? They didn't take the eggs. They took the knowing. And knowing is the one thing they can never charge you for once you've got it back. You're the kind of person who always suspected the old way was quietly better, and that somebody profited every time a family forgot how to do for itself. You were right. Trust that instinct. It keeps leading you back to things worth keeping. Now, I want to hear from you, and I mean this specifically. Did anyone in your family keep eggs in water, or in a crock, or on the pantry shelf without a fridge? Do you remember a grandmother or an old neighbor doing something like this and everyone thinking it was just old-fashioned? Tell me about it. Type it in the comments right now, even one line, because those memories are exactly how this knowledge gets saved before the last people who lived it are gone. And if you feel that pull, the pull to reclaim the things that were quietly buried so somebody else could keep selling them back to us, then come along, subscribe, and stand with the folks doing exactly that, one forgotten method at a time. Because the next trail I'm following is just as big. It's the old way Canadian families kept butter and cheese good for a year without a fridge, using nothing but a bucket and the ground under the house, and there's a name for it that hardly anyone says anymore. I found the crock. Wait until you see what else was down in that cellar. I'm the friend who walks you through it all, and there's more I didn't get to here. Inside the Northern Ways circle, I pick up right where this video stopped. You can ask me your own question, and I answer you myself, no bot. And you won't be alone. Folks like you are already in there with me, Just point your phone's camera at the code on your screen. Cancel anytime, one click.